Welcome back, Paddy.
I've been away for 10 days. Did anything happen?
Yes.
Right.
A lot.
That is what the news cycle's like, isn't it? Every time you think it's bad, then it gets worse.
Yeah, and we spent most of the week talking about Rachel Reeves and her big plans for the economy and for public spending oodles and oodles and oodles of extra cash on the NHS and whether or not her sums add up. And then all of a sudden, along comes yet another crisis moment far away. This time, attacks on Israel, on Iran, then Iranian retaliation, and of course, in a region that is already incredibly tense.
The link to Rachel Reeves being that the oil price has soared. Oil means a lot to our economy. Rising oil price means rising inflation normally. So we'll unpack what's happening in the Middle East and what might happen here at home in Saturday's Newscast.
It's Laura in the studio.
It's Paddy in the studio.
And I'm pleased to say that Shashank Joshi, the defence editor at The Economist, is back on Newscast, back with me and Paddy for the first time. But you were helping us all out yesterday on the podcast too. So thank you very much indeed for being with us again.
Thanks for having me back. Great to be back.
Shashank, is it war by another name?
Oh, this is a full-fledged war that we're in. We're talking about 100 ballistic missiles fired at Tel Aviv, people dead in Israel, nearly 80 people, if not more, dead in Iran, nuclear sites being struck, Iran's military leadership wiped out, and the Israelis signaling that this could go on for 2 or even 3 weeks. So these are not just sort of pinprick airstrikes of the kind that we saw from Israel against Iran last year, or the kind we've seen from Israel against Iraq in 1981, against Syria in 2007. This is a full-fledged Israeli-Iranian war at this stage.
And Shashank, do please in the next 15 minutes correct us if we are wrong, because this is much more your area of expertise than it is, I think, Paddy, fair to say, either of ours in terms of the technicalities of what's going on here. But it's always the kind of thing that's been said to me by diplomats and politicians around the margins that, well, there are all these tensions in the regions, but of course we often see proxies. The thing that would be really awful would be a direct conflict between Israel and Iran. And that is actually now what we're seeing, clear as day.
Well, here's the interesting thing. For 40 years, the strategy of the Islamic Republic of Iran has been to develop an entire regional network of what some people call proxies, but they are effectively militias or armed groups. Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the militias in Iraq. And the idea was to have a buffer zone, make sure that if conflict happens, it happens away from Iran. What happened on October 7th with Hamas's assault on Israel was to set in motion a chain of events that culminated in the collapse of that entire proxy network, the decimation of Hezbollah, the Hamas on its knees, the collapse of the Syrian state, and the Houthis severely weakened as well. And war has come to Iran itself. So this is more than just an intelligence failure, a military failure. It's a failure of the grand strategy of the Islamic Republic over many, many decades.
And we're seeing a clear strategy shift, it seems to me, in Israel. And you've covered many of the background worries in yesterday's newscast. What's happened since is that the Israeli government has warned Tehran will burn if it fires more missiles into Israel. You've told us there have been deaths in Israel. At the same time, Benjamin Netanyahu has said he wants regime change. So we're now in Iran, regime change in Iran. So we're now in a position where the next 24 hours will show a lot about both sides' strategy.
That's right, yes. And this is you've I think, articulated a tension in the Israeli approach, which is they're saying if you strike population centres, and here I should note, of course, that there are some valid military targets in Israeli population centres. The Kiryat, the central military brain of Israel, the Ministry of Defence, is inside Tel Aviv. So I suspect that is what Iran was trying to strike in at least some of its strikes yesterday. But nonetheless, what Israel is saying is if you hit population centres, we will expand the campaign and hit economic targets like oil terminals, but also political regime targets. However, Netanyahu is also saying, as he did last night, that these strikes are aimed at, I think he said, paving the way for your free freedom to Iranians, take advantage of this moment. So in a way, he's sort of having his cake and eating it as well, saying this is regime change, go and rise up against the regime, because he knows that is the most durable way to achieve a change in its nuclear ambitions. But he's also saying, I'll only do that if you strike population centres. That tension is yet to be resolved, but I think Israel will begin hitting a wider range of targets in the day ahead as Iran continues to strike Israel with ballistic missiles.
And there are two important bits of context here. Is one, there are many, many people who live in Iran who absolutely abhor the Iranian regime. So the Iranian government and regime is not the same as the Iranian people, although the Iranian opposition is also in itself made up of lots of different groups. So we're dealing with more than two blocks of people here, but I think that's an important point. Secondly, much of the international community does condemn Iran's development of nuclear technology. They always deny it's for anything suspect or towards trying to develop a weapon, although only a few days ago they were censured by the international community, including the UK, for basically not coming clean over what they're really up to. So if you haven't been following this that closely, I think those are two quite important bits of context. When it comes, though, Shashank, to the UK, there was a warning from Iran today saying it would target the UK and America and France if it was aiding Israel in any way. What's your understanding of the UK role this time?
I think it's non-existent. The UK, of course, has a military base in Cyprus within range of Iranian missiles, and previously it has used RAF Typhoons, Eurofighter Typhoon jets, to conduct bombing raids against the Houthis and the Red Sea from Cyprus. But it's not struck Iran. It's not involved in this. It isn't refueling any aircraft that Israel's using. And although last year the RAF did participate in the air defense of Israel in those big ballistic missile strikes, I think the RAF shot down a handful of Iranian drones, no more than a handful. On this occasion, given the sensitivities of what Israel is doing, I suspect the UK will stay out of it. It's only the United States right now helping to shoot down Iranian missiles from naval destroyers and from ground-based air defense. The UK does make some components, for example, that are used in the F-35s that Israel has used in these strikes. But the F-35 has components from a very wide range of countries. I think, Canada, Belgium, all sorts of places. So that's not really direct involvement. And I suspect, in fact, if you really dig down into it, the dependency on components is much greater for the UK on Israel than for Israel on the UK, which is why the UK has been cautious not to let that get caught up in any sanctions.
Laura mentioned that the Iranian regime is abhorred by many Iranians. The same is true in Israel. Many Israelis abhor Benjamin Netanyahu and think he is prolonging war, expanding war, diverting news attention from what's happening in Gaza. Does he want to drag in the US? Is it part of Benjamin Netanyahu's strategy to force Donald Trump into this?
It's a great question, and I think the answer is probably at this stage, yes, he wants to pull the US in, and that's for several reasons. One of them is they need American help with air defense, and that is happening, but they need more of it. Secondly, if this campaign is going to be 2 weeks, Iran is on its knees, but it's a big country, and Israel is a small country where the airport can be shut down and has been shut down by the threat of strike. So they need American help to replenish their arsenals. But above all, so far, Israel has focused on preparing the ground for military targets, clearing the way for it to act, destroying Iran's air force, its air bases, its missile launchers, giving itself freedom of maneuver. It has not yet done crippling damage to Iranian nuclear sites. Although it has hit many of them, it has not destroyed them. And from all the sources I talk to in the United States, in Europe, in the Middle East, there is doubt over Israel's ability to, in a lasting fashion, destroy the very deeply buried site, the enrichment plant at Fordow, near the city of Qom. And so they might need American help with bunker buster munitions and also the means to deliver those on bombers to do that damage. Right now, I think Netanyahu would really want to say to Trump, look, you may not want this war, you may not have asked for it, but if you don't step in, the risk is this job is half done. So you have to help me finish it. That's what I think he will be saying to Trump at this minute.
We've had a question similar to Paddy's from a newscaster, Phil Hemming from Herefordshire, has got in touch on WhatsApp. And he asks, are the Israelis, though, using the Iran attack as a distraction from what's happening in Gaza? Because the news now seems to have moved on. How much, Shashank, do you think this is about Israel's long-term, profound fear of Iran developing a nuclear capability? And how much is it Netanyahu's politicking? And as Paddy suggests, many people's assessment that he's strong as long as he's fighting a war, because many people, I'm not going to say he's strong because he's not strong. He's stronger when he's fighting a war because he's under intense political pressure.
It's true that Netanyahu for 40 years has been obsessed with attacking Iran to the point where it's a bit of a running joke in Israeli politics. And it came close to happening in Netanyahu's second time in office between 2009 and 2013. In that, on those occasions, he tried twice to launch attacks on Iran's program, but basically his generals and the Mossad opposed it, as did the Americans at the time. I don't think this is Benjamin Netanyahu launching a war to distract from Gaza. I think this is Netanyahu seeing a golden political and military opportunity to do what he has sought to do for 40 years. And I think Israelis, by the way, are genuinely concerned about what they see as an acceleration in the pace of Iranian weapons activity. I don't buy everything they claim. Some of that weapons activity is maybe months old. It's not this week. It's not like the Iranians will have a bomb just around the corner. But I think it's a genuine fear.
But also, we've all been schooled, haven't we, in what happens with the nuclear strategy considerations in this new world order. Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons and was promised a security blanket by the West and was then invaded by Russia. Iran has been racing to get nuclear technology, and Israel says was weeks away from getting the nuclear bomb. So the existential question is there. The strategy that I grew up with as a young student about mutual assured destruction is back. And on this existential question, I mean, the Iranians can say correctly that the US and the UK conspired in a coup in 1953 to get rid of the leader Mossadegh. They installed the Pahlavi royal family, the Shah, who was then overthrown by the Islamic Republic, etc. And where is this leaving, with calls for a regime change, where is this leaving the Ayatollah Khamenei? Will he be seen in public? Is he at risk?
I think given the current Israeli threats, the Israeli defense minister saying Tehran will burn if you attack our cities, Netanyahu's threat of regime change, the clinical precision attacks on the top generals yesterday, I think it is unlikely Khamenei will risk coming out. I think he will fear that assassination, just like Israel assassinated Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas in Tehran, just like they assassinated Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah in Beirut, I think Khamenei will legitimately fear he is a target of assassination, and that could basically cause total upheaval and chaos in Iran. He will be in as secure a location as they can manage. However, I think they'll be concerned Israel has clearly penetrated them inside out. So they will be looking to all possible corners from how to keep him safe, perhaps moving him from place to place.
And Shashank, we'll say goodbye to you in a second, but just give us a worst case scenario. And also because the world is very unpredictable and we like also to try to be cheerful when we can. What's the best case scenario here? Because sometimes when there's a crisis, there's also an opportunity.
Well, the best case could be that Israel judged it's done enough damage to stop, on the basis that Iran will have to come to the negotiating table to do a deal over its nuclear program, giving it up. I think that's, I'm afraid, very unlikely. The worst case is either that Iran begins to attack American targets, drawing America in fully, or it continues to attack Israeli cities. Israelis respond by hitting Iranian oil terminals. The oil price globally spikes, causing chaos in the world economy. In the process, by the way, shoring up Russia's economy and improving its position in Ukraine. And that this turns into a general conflict of regime change, with Iran then being left with no incentive not to launch as many missiles as it can at all possible targets. And that, I'm afraid, is still frighteningly possible at this stage of the conflict. But it is early days.
Shashank, thanks so much for being with us today. And your knowledge is incredibly helpful to help us try and unpick what's a very quick moving and also a very confusing picture, I think, for most of us who don't follow this inside out day to day. So thanks very much indeed for your time.
Thanks for having me.
A long time ago when this podcast began,
Less lengthy than some, it's fair to say.
You said that there was a British knock-on from global crises, plural. And I mentioned the oil price, which is obviously the sort of schoolboy way to look at this. But the crises that are coordinating in the world do give the UK government wiggle room to say, the world has changed. Therefore, our plans and our forecasts have changed.
Yeah, actually, a city source of mine said to me yesterday, I thought tax rises in the autumn were probably going to happen anyway, but now I think they're inevitable. And the government would have cover to do that because they could say, aha, look, there is a world crisis that has meant the oil price has gone up and then the price of everything has gone up. And now the books look harder, even tighter than we thought they were. So goodness me, we're going to have to put taxes up to make ends meet. Now, really importantly, the government would say they've got no plans to put up taxes. Point two, what we do not know yet about this conflict is whether it will have the prolonged effect on the oil price in the way that the war in Ukraine resulted in an energy price shock that ultimately saw Liz Truss, of all people, paying all of our energy bills one winter. However, without question, this whole situation does two things. It puts jitters into the world political and economic system, absolutely, as Keir Starmer's on his way to the G7 in Canada. World leaders have suddenly got another big thing to worry about. And it also unquestionably does make Rachel Reeves's job look harder. Business hates uncertainty. Economies don't like uncertainty. And that means that it's harder to do business, harder to make money, and harder for governments to make ends meet. That's the simple truth of it.
So you've got the whole spending round outdated. And the Chancellor, who's on your programme tomorrow, is going to have to try and find a form of words that leaves all options open, isn't it, for bringing money in?
I think that's right. I think that's absolutely right. And already on Thursday morning, the day after her big review, she was already doing that very careful thing that politicians do of not ruling anything out, which then leads to headlines of Reeves won't rule out tax rises, because she won't. And she almost ruled out tax rises, but then did put up national insurance, although they then claimed if you hadn't looked at the small print, well, more fool you. See where that got them into politically.
I mean, I know this isn't really about me, but...
Paddy, everything's really about you. I see the world entirely through that lens.
The UK economy isn't really about me. But when, Henry, you and I were riffing about future options, I predicted a rise in this Parliament in income tax.
You did.
And I think it's time to look again at what tax she can raise, because you can't just fiddle around in the margins. If you've got to grab one of the big levers. If it's that bad, it's either that bad or it's either not that bad. That seems. Well,
and the big levers are income tax or VAT or national insurance, and they've already done national insurance. Income tax would be the other one, and we've all talked round this. But you're right. I mean, it may be if this, and let's hope that this is doesn't turn into a prolonged conflict, but it is possible that this will result in the government having to do all their sums again, and it also just adds to that huge list. When you stop and think about it, this government, mighty majority though they may have, just has got this list of dreadful situations to try to contend with. They've got, big Russia v Europe conflict in lots of different ways, obviously primarily in Ukraine, but also Russia doing cyber attacks against the UK. You've then got Iran v Israel, which was a sort of big structural face-off now, which is, as Shashank was suggesting, a genuine conflict, a real war. Then you've got all the problems that this government is very happy to identify as crises at home. Housing crisis, the NHS is broken, the prisons crisis. They're quite fond of that word themselves. And then two other issues that some of my contacts were talking about to me this week that they're a bit cross that they feel the government's not really addressing, which is the size of the debt, the size of the welfare bill, because of our demographics. So debt and demographics, two big crises. Some people would use that word, that this government isn't really looking at too closely.
So that bounces us into the Parliament with its massive majority and its 4 years for the government. But also, where's the wiggle room for the Conservatives, the Liberal Democrats and the SNP, for instance, the other parties? The Liberal Democrats have been very plain. They want a complete halt of all arms sales to Israel by the UK. Currently, I was looking at this on the House of Commons library, which is a marvellous resource, isn't it?
It is. Here.
David Lammy suspended licences of direct sales. He allowed dual-use technologies, and he also made a statement saying we're part of the global supply chain for the F-35, which Shashank was saying. But nonetheless, is there any political differences to look for? Can the Conservatives say, my solution is this, and it's going to look very different from what Mr. Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, is doing?
I mean, it was a few weeks ago, Kemi Badenoch was with us on a Sunday morning, and she, paraphrasing, more or less said, Israel's an ally, I'm never going to criticise them in public. Now, I'm paraphrasing, but her support for Israel is of a different tone now to that of the government, which has shifted over the last year very, very much. And it's much more qualified now, and it's much blunter now. And I think it's fair to observe, as one senior MP said to me yesterday, that the relationship between the UK government and Israel is now quite significantly degraded compared to this time last year. So it'll be very interesting to hear how government ministers handle questions about their attacks on Iran in the next 24 hours. I don't know how Keir Starmer will approach this subject when he's inevitably asked about it in Canada. What we've had so far has been quite sort of hedgy, I think, because the government isn't, they are trying to stay out of it, perhaps because it's just too hot to handle.
And we're on a Saturday afternoon, so a bit of this is speculative. One thing I wanted to bring to the table, which links back to the interview you did with Stoltenberg, the former leader of NATO,
yes,
about the New World Order,
yes,
is that it was interesting to me to hear Shashank talk about the oil bounce helping President Putin. And it seems to me, and you were early on this, you now ask the question, does this crisis, is it good for our side or their side? Does it help the sort of Western alliance, which was already in trouble because of a schism between the US and the West? Does it bring them together? Does it help them? Does it help the other side? And it's becoming very clear to me that that's how you see these things increasingly. And a big price rise for oil bankrolls Putin, bankrolls his war in Ukraine. So what Donald Trump does with the G7 in Canada, is he going to seek greater unity, or is he going to allow some sort of difference to be seen? That's a really big 48 hours ahead of us.
It is. So there's going to be plenty to talk about tomorrow. And we should say, I think so much has happened. We should say quite specifically, we're recording this just before 1:30 on Saturday, and all sorts of things could have happened even by the end of today, let alone by tomorrow when we shall be reunited. What are you doing on your programme tomorrow?
Well, we are going to be live. This is a very kinetic situation, so we're not knowing. So we've got some of this unplanned, to be perfectly honest with listeners. We've left time. Lise Doucette will co-present the programme with me. And also we will bid for, moving parts at home.
You were bid for moving parts.
We were.
Hello, is that the moving parts? We'd like you to come on our programme. Yes, well, we are in a slightly similar position. We know that we will be speaking to the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, and the Shadow Chancellor, also Mel Stride for the Conservatives, and Christian Amanpour, news anchor and international news queen, will also be on our panel tomorrow.
So that's interesting. We've both reached for news queens.
Yes.
You've got Christian Amanpour. I've got Lise Doucette.
You just set me up for a joke there, but I'm not going to be tempted.
No, I'm just thinking that when they get together, is it like, does one feel sort of the force?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's, you're bowing and scraping all around.
Is Christian coming in?
Yes.
Yeah, maybe we should try and engineer a brush pass between Lise Doucette and Christian Amanpour, see what happens to the news force. Also, I mean, our listeners are interested in how we're all keeping sane.
Are they?
And is there space in this news cycle for anything else?
I know how I keep saying this, by talking to you for half an hour on a Saturday and then talking to you for half an hour on a Sunday.
Well, I mean, I think that would drive you in the other direction. But we're
comparative, though, you see.
But just it'd be interesting to know from newscasters, when in listening and watching, do you expect to see an hour of misery, doom, and apocalypse? Or do you expect to see an hour of a mix of life? Because life is being led. Things are happening that are not bad. Do you include them or exclude them?
That's a good question. It's a question we were asking, in fact, in the newsroom this morning. Do people want hardcore information, or do they also want a little bit of fun? So newscasters, I'm sure you don't all agree, but do tell us what you would like, because I know also at the moment that someone I know who shall remain nameless had messaged me last night and said, it's all too awful, I'm going to go and get drunk. So there we are.
Well, enough about your editor. No, that won't be left in.
Outrageous.
That won't be left in.
It wasn't them, but I will not say who it was.
It won't be left
Nor
in.
was it you, unusually.
I can answer the question.
Yeah, go on.
When you said, do you want information?
Yes.
Yes, I do.
Yes.
Do I want speculation? No, I do not. So I think that the moment one feels that the line's being crossed, move on. Just tell me the thing, give me some context, give me some history even. But no, I don't want a bunch of people speculating for 75 hours at the moment. Thank you very much.
God, doesn't that just about kill off Newscast?
No, it doesn't. We have not been doing speculation. We've been doing analysis.
I'm teasing. I'm teasing you. I'm teasing you. Well, it's very nice to have you back. And we shall join each other again tomorrow, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Newscasters, this is a very fast-moving news situation, and we've done our best to bring you what's going on Saturday morning, but it may well look very different by the time we shall meet again.
Thank you for listening, and goodbye.
Goodbye.